Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm your host, Bridget Burns, Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Marjorie Valbrun, Managing Editor of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, I partner with a journalist to have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor to better understand what it's like to lead in this unique moment in time. And today is definitely a day where we get a chance to hear from someone who is giving us that perspective.
Our guest today is the Chancellor of the California Community Colleges, Eloy. Chancellor Oakley recently finished a stint supporting the U.S. Department of Education. And we're delighted to speak with him and hear about what he learned, what he thinks higher education leaders need to think about right now, and whatever else is on his mind.
Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you all. Yeah, no, thank you for having me back.
We were chit-chatting earlier that for folks at home that Eloy got to return from DC in November to California, and nobody is sad for you about that change in weather. Just the chance to be able to spend these cold days in a beautiful place and be able to return back to a vibrant system like that. Very jealous.
Well, I had to retire my jackets for the moment since it's still probably about 70 degrees outside. So
totally
give them a break.
So we wanted to first ask you, you'd made the difficult decision to take time off and to leave on a short stint to help with the BBB, Build Back Better, work in DC. Can you just share about the deliberation, the decision-making process to make that call, and perhaps whether or not this is something you'd recommend for others to do a short stint who are higher ed leaders?
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful to Secretary Cardona and to the entire team at the Department of Education and to the Biden administration for even making the call and inviting me to come help. So for me, the deliberation was easy. When the secretary called, I, of course, said I would do anything I could to make it work and to provide as much support as I could. It was also easy for me because, I was a very public supporter of the Biden campaign. I got to participate with some of the policy development during the campaign. So it was relatively easy. And of course, given that a lot of the team was in the Obama administration, it made it a lot easier to say yes, because I knew where these individuals are coming from. I know their perspective. I know the great work that they want to do. And I know, given my experience with the previous administration, the previous Department of Education, how much work needed to be done to get the department supporting students again. So I would certainly recommend to any higher ed leader, if they have any opportunity to help the administration in any way, they need our help. They need our support, and I think they're open to trying to make the department and the administration respond better to the kinds of institutions that serve the majority of Americans.
That's great.
So,
thanks.
What surprised you most about working in the department? And what did you like the best, and what did you not like so much, aside from the weather?
Well, fortunately, most of the summer was pretty mild in DC. So I thought the weather was pretty much fine whenever I was there. The thing that surprised me most is, I'm from a big state, California, and we have a certain amount of bureaucracy in the state of California. But federal government, even for somebody who worked with the federal government a long time, it is still a bit of a shock how many layers. I think I'm still peeling off the red tape as we speak, but it is a big bureaucracy. And the other thing that surprised me, obviously from the outside looking in, and with all the turmoil we've experienced during COVID, before COVID, There's a lot of challenges in all 50 states. I got a chance to work with a great many states as we worked on the American Families Plan, which ultimately became the Build Back Better agenda. And the biggest surprise, I think, is how different all 50 states are. I worked with states before, but once I got a chance to really understand how federal policy would work in a state, it became exceptionally obvious how difficult it is for the Department of Education to try and craft federal policy for the entire nation, given how different our states are. And of course, states are primarily responsible for higher education in their states. And then, of course, the final thing is how much online education stretches across states. So it makes it even more complex to develop federal policy.
So did the red tape make you feel frustrated and less effective as what you would have liked to have been?
It certainly can be frustrating. I think the first year of any administration it's difficult, and then you layer on top of that an administration that has come in to a pandemic. Layer on top of that an administration who's come in at a time when there's still a lot of people who believe that the election wasn't legitimate. So you layer all these things, all these complexities on top of an already bureaucratic system. It makes it frustrating to want to get things done, particularly issues that are bipartisan. And for the most part, higher education, particularly community colleges, are a bipartisan issue. Getting people back to work is a bipartisan issue. But there are so many lingering issues that complicate the existing bureaucracy that's what made me frustrated.
So I'm curious about the other side of bureaucracy, because you're not the boss. And you go from being in a system that I'm sure inherently there's bureaucracy at California community colleges like there is everywhere. But now you're in a system where you have to navigate and you're not in charge. And I'm wondering if that actually made you possibly a better boss or more empathetic. I'm just curious about the impact you think that this experience might have on you as a chancellor and your leadership style.
Well, I think it's a great point and insight that you picked up on, Bridget. I've for the last, I don't know how many years, 20 years, I've sort of been the person, at the top of the food chain, whether as a college president or as a chancellor. And then suddenly I'm staffing the Secretary of Education. And the first time I walked into a meeting with him, I wanted to answer the questions. And I had to remind myself, it's not about me, it's about the secretary. And I think it's a wonderful experience for any leader to suddenly realize that, you're there to support somebody else. And it gives you a perspective of what your team goes through when they're trying to support you as a leader. So after that first meeting, I think I settled in pretty well. And I saw myself as a resource. I see myself as trying to help something that's bigger than me. And that's an important perspective, I think, for any leader, because none of us, regardless of what position we hold or what ivory tower we sit in, is the be-all, end-all of higher education. Some of us may believe that, but it's certainly not the case. And so for me, I think it provided me an exercise in humility, which is necessary for any of us in these roles. And now that I'm back, I just want to be supportive and of service to my team. I want them to be out front. I want to be able to support them to become leaders, and I feel much more comfortable with that now. I don't have to be the guy who is the one talking for the system. I'm hopeful that I can help many others begin to demonstrate that leadership and to put them in roles that make them feel like, their thoughts, their ideas, their perspective is now front and center.
Do you think it might impact your, sorry, just for a quick follow-up, do you think it might impact you as a manager? I'm just curious about, not only have you been leading and been the principal for a long time, and now you got experience to sit in another space around the room. I'm just curious, as you now go back to managing and overseeing your team, you might now remember what it's like. I mean, you always have a board, right? But it's different when there's an actual person to focus your energy on who's your quote unquote leader or manager. And I'm just wondering if you think there's any way that it might affect how you manage differently, because you got that nice little reminder.
No, I think it absolutely does. And it makes you realize that, you take for granted things that you say as the leader. And you realize that when it's coming from the other direction, you focus so much on everything the leader says, and you're trying to understand each and every word. And as the leader yourself, you're not always paying attention to what you're saying or what your looks are doing to affect somebody's perception of what's going on, or what you say, who you say hello to, who you don't say hello to. All these things, matter. So I think it does help me and will help me become a better manager, help me try to make more space and time for each individual member of the team so that they all feel like they're connected to the work. So absolutely. And again, back to your point, I think any opportunity that any leader gets to be in this kind of role, I think will only improve their ability to lead going forward.
Interesting. So did anyone give you advice that helped you during this time in the experience? I know that the SNHU president, Paul LeBlanc, had done something like this a long time ago. I'm wondering if he gave you any guidance.
The short answer is yes. And, I try to maintain good relationships with friends and colleagues across the country. And in this case, I reached out to many of them, including Paul LeBlanc, because I knew Paul had taken on this role working for then Undersecretary Ted Mitchell in the Obama team. So yes, Paul is a good friend, and reached out to him and got his thoughts and advice, reached out to Ted Mitchell, to former Secretary King, former Secretary Duncan, former Secretary Spellings, everyone I could, who I know spent time in that department, because ultimately, I just wanted to understand how to be as helpful as I could in the time that I was there. And all these perspectives helped me be as effective as I could. And they also helped me understand, how to proceed in those first few weeks, and what kind of perspective I should walk in with. So they were all very helpful, and I think helped me make the most of my time there.
So who would you say gave you some of the advice that you thought was the most helpful, or like what kind of advice did they give you that you were able to apply to your time there?
Well, I think all of us who work with the Department of Education think we know the Department of Education, but the Department of Education has so many tentacles and so many offices and so many titles that, people like Ted Mitchell or John King or others who have worked in the department who really helped me understand who's who, which departments do I need to rely on, which departments, which areas do I need to make sure and keep communication open with. So that kind of advice really helped me in those first few weeks, because, it was like a foreign country walking into that building. And there were a lot of places, a lot of offices, a lot of people that I've never worked with in that building, and let alone you're walking into the building, specifically the main building at the Lyndon B. Johnson building, which was pretty much empty because of COVID. So it was critically important for me to understand the organizational chart there at the Department of Education, because I would work with the people I work with, but I didn't know everybody else and how everybody else interacted. So that really helped me come up to speed quickly.
So I'm curious, can you share a bit about the context about why you did this right now, and like what the urgency or the need is? Because I was sharing earlier that I think in the midst of, COVID and life and overwhelm and burnout, people are also seeing stuff going on in DC and trying to follow up and pay attention. We're here about the College Completion Fund. We hear about Build Back Better, but like the context of, based on your experience coming from the world that that these leaders live in and how everything is just like putting out fires constantly, what would give you why this moment for you to do this? And can you give folks a little context about what's going on?
Sure. So, I mean, like many of us who have led over the last 10, 15 years, we experienced 8 years of the Obama administration when institutions like community colleges, like regional public 4 years, finally got attention that they were looking for. It wasn't all about the most selective universities. It was about the most inclusive universities and colleges. And so when President Biden got elected and he started putting together his team, for me, that was a moment of urgency. This is a moment in time that we rarely get, where we have a president, certainly a first lady, and an administration who's willing to put attention on institutions that serve the majority of Americans. So that was my primary driver is, this is a moment in time that we need to lean into, particularly at a time when, many throughout this country were hurting, not just because of the pandemic, but certainly post the last Great Recession and the challenges we had during President Trump's 4 years in institutions like the ones I serve in California. So rather than me complaining about the administration, why not try to influence the administration? So that's what led me to this. And of course, the Americans Family Plan that was introduced by the president, the American Recovery Plan, all of these issues and the focus and the attention that they put on, day-to-day communities in this country and the institutions that serve them is what motivated me to go help. So I think, you see a lot of that in the Build Back Better Budget Act, which I hope all of us take the time to make sure that we're telling our senators how important it is to higher education, because it's a great step forward to support students, first-generation students, students of color, students who have not seen higher education as a primary driver in their families. This is the time. So we need to get this budget passed. And you've mentioned the completion grants that are, while there's not $60 billion in the budget, it's still a substantial amount of money to help focus time and attention on completion. There's increases in Pell. And yes, while the College Promise proposal, the free community college proposal is not in this budget act, I have confidence that it will be back, and that conversation needs to continue. And I hope that higher ed comes together and works together to make sure all parts of higher ed are benefiting from this administration. I'm one of the biggest disappointments is that the American College Promise proposal did not make it in. And I think that was a missed opportunity, particularly for institutions that didn't see themselves as benefiting from free community college. I think it'll be back, and I hope that we all can pull together and make it happen, because the administration is not done yet, but the urgency is still there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is there any particular issue you're most proud of that you were able to shine attention on while you were at the Department of Ed? Something that you're most proud of?
Well, I had the great opportunity to work on a lot of issues, and I thank Secretary Cardona for that opportunity and his entire team, and certainly now Undersecretary James Quall for the confidence to let me work on so many issues. But the thing I'm most proud of is having the chance to work with a lot of talented people who most of us never hear about. They have some really great people in the Department of Education, and I got a chance to give them a perspective of policy as it actually works on the ground. I think if I'm proud of anything, that's what I'm most proud of, is when we're talking about the America's College Promise proposal, when we're talking about completion grants, when we're talking about consumer protection as an issue of policy, or loan forgiveness. I was able to give the perspective of what it means on the ground in states like California to the kind of students that I get a chance to serve in California. So I think in that way I was helpful, and I think you'll see the perspective of the department going forward as really seeing that as a primary objective, to really dig in and to open the doors to constituent groups to really understand how their decisions are impacting students on the ground and the culture that's higher education. Because I think we can talk about policy all day long, but unless we change the culture of higher education, we're not going to change the outcomes in higher education.
And on the flip side of that, what are you most proud of that was happening at California community colleges while you were away and now?
Well, again, leaving the state gave me the opportunity to see how great the state is. And particularly at a time like this, when we've got so much going on about, who do we include, who do we exclude? And, I'm just proud to know that a state like California tries to include everyone. Sometimes not always successfully, but I think the perspective is we want to be inclusive. And I have to thank Governor Newsom and the entire team there for continuing to push that perspective and for trying to fully fund public higher education in California. That's something that's not happening in all 50 states. We're not having arguments about critical race theory in higher education. We're not having arguments about, we have concerns about vaccine policies, masking policies, but they're different arguments here in California. So I think I'm very proud to be a resident, a native of California. I'm very glad to be back. And of course, the California community colleges continue to be at the front line of the recovery of the pandemic. And I'm very proud of the work that our institutions do, and particularly around things like eliminating standardized testing, reforming remedial education. All these things are now happening in some degree in all 50 states. And I think California community colleges should be proud that they have been leaders in this area.
That's great. Yes, you are in the future for many of us who don't have the same kind of policy flexibility. I am curious about if this makes you think differently about how presidents and chancellors engage with policymakers, mainly because, I don't know if you saw yourself as a policy wonk before this. There are definitely some presidents who are super wonky and they love to mainly drive conversation into policy. But you always were a bit broader, and, I don't think you even made me talk about very specific contextual policy. So, the fact that you are a very kind of a well-rounded leader, and then you went into this policy role. I'm just curious if you have any guidance or advice or a way of thinking about how we might think that people need to be policy wonks to be effective in DC, but actually what they need are storytellers, or perhaps I'm just curious if you can share your experience with that.
So I think to your last point, lots of people have lots of different policy perspectives, and there are plenty of policy wonks in this space. Higher education is full of them. They're on our campuses. There is a nonprofit institute for some higher ed topic, everywhere in the country. I have no more room for reports on my desk. Okay, everybody's got a report on something. The issue here is, and as leaders, I think we need to think about how things interconnect, and we need to put the students at the center of the discussion. Sometimes we think we know what's best for students, and we cling to those notions. We become dogmatic about those notions, and the reality is there is no perfect policy. the reality is what we need to do is change the way that we think about students, the way we think about higher education, what we've been handed over generations that we just tend to think about as just the way it should be, and to begin to break those notions. And so storytelling, the understanding of what students are going through, changing so that we can meet students where they're at, and quit putting the institution at the center, put the student at the center. And sometimes we cling to what our institutions need. And I think, this last round of, the Build Back Better agenda gave me a clear insight. Sometimes institutions focus on how to maximize resources for the institution rather than maximize the opportunity for students to succeed regardless of where they start. That's what the focus needs to be. So, from my perspective, why wouldn't I be advocating for more resources for pre-K or for K-12? Because if they're better off when they get to my community college, we're going to have better students. Likewise, we need to work as a community of educators, not as institutions that belong to an organization, an advocacy organization in DC, and that's our only perspective. That's the wrong perspective, and that's not going to get us anywhere in this country.
Well, that was super helpful. And I think it's the right perspective for folks to have as they're thinking about their career and whether or not they might want to take a stint to do something similar, or they might just merely want to show up and, hit the pavement to be able to talk to policymakers about the experience of students. So thanks for giving us a window into your experience as a leader. It's rare for someone to go through this kind of a transition. We wanted to kind of strike while we could to get your kind of real-time response to this, mainly because maybe it will encourage other folks to do it, or it could have discouraged. If you had said terrible things, then maybe there would be nobody else do this ever again. But I think folks are going to probably contemplate doing something like this in the future. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a wonderful opportunity to learn from you. And Marjorie, as always, thanks for being such a great co-host. Folks, we will see you all next week, same time, same place. And otherwise, we hope you have a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget.
Have a good one.